The morning had started like any other Tuesday at Denver International Airport, but something felt fundamentally wrong to Maria Santos the moment she woke up. She couldn't explain it, that inexplicable heaviness in her chest, the way her hands trembled slightly as she prepared her 3-year-old daughter Emma for their trip to California. Maria had always been intuitive, the kind of person who trusted her gut feelings, and right now, every instinct screamed that today would be different. She'd almost called her sister to reschedule the visit, but Emma had been anticipating this trip for weeks, drawing pictures of Grandma's house with colorful crayons and practicing how to say, "I love you, Grandma," in her sweet, lisping voice. As they drove toward the airport, Emma sat quietly in her car seat, staring out the window with unusual pensiveness. Normally, the chatty 3-year-old would sing songs, ask endless questions about clouds and birds, and narrate everything she saw. Today she was silent, almost contemplative in a way that seemed impossible for a child her age. Maria kept glancing at her daughter in the rearview mirror, concern gnawing at her. "Are you okay, sweetie?" she'd asked, reaching back to touch Emma's tiny knee. Emma had simply nodded, but her dark eyes held something Maria couldn't quite identify: worry, premonition. It unsettled her deeply. The Denver International Airport's departure level was its usual chaos of honking horns, rolling luggage, and harried travelers. Maria checked her watch. They had plenty of time before their flight. She parked in the short-term lot and unbuckled Emma, lifting her daughter into her arms. Emma felt heavier than usual, her small body tense against Maria's shoulder. The child clutched her worn teddy bear, Mr. Fluffles, whom she took everywhere, with unusual intensity. Together, they made their way through the automatic doors, and immediately the airport's aggressive energy enveloped them. Travelers rushed past without making eye contact. Annoyed businesspeople barked into phones. Airport employees moved with mechanical efficiency, their faces blank with professional exhaustion. Maria navigated toward Security Checkpoint B, joining the increasingly crowded line. She'd flown dozens of times, and she'd perfected the process. Have ID ready, liquids in the clear bag, shoes easy to remove. Emma clung to her mother's neck, her small arms wrapped tightly around Maria's shoulders. As they moved forward in line, Maria noticed him, a man who stood out immediately, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with the kind of physique that suggested disciplined gym sessions and deliberate physical conditioning. His suit was expensive, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored to his lean frame, but it was his face that made Maria's skin crawl. The man's expression was utterly empty, completely devoid of the normal human softness that characterized most faces. His eyes were the coldest Maria had ever seen, pale blue, almost translucent, with an intensity that felt predatory. They scanned the terminal with methodical precision, cataloging exits, counting security personnel, assessing threats and opportunities like a hunter surveying prey. His jaw was clenched so tightly that she could see the muscles working beneath his skin. He wore an expensive watch, diamond cufflinks, and carried a black leather briefcase that he gripped with white-knuckled intensity. But what truly alarmed Maria was how he kept checking the briefcase, touching it, opening it slightly to peer inside, then quickly closing it again. His behavior screamed concealment, desperation, danger. Maria's protective instincts, those fierce maternal sensors that had evolved over millennia, started screaming warnings. She'd read articles about human trafficking, about attacks, about the terrible things that happened in crowded places. Her grip on Emma tightened involuntarily. The man's eyes suddenly flicked toward them, making direct contact with Maria's gaze for just a fraction of a second. In that brief moment, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice, not just coldness but active malevolence. This wasn't a man with normal thoughts and normal intentions. Whatever lived behind those eyes was fundamentally broken, fundamentally dangerous. Emma suddenly tensed against her mother's body. The little girl's entire frame went rigid, her muscles contracting as if she'd received an electric shock. Maria felt the change immediately. Emma's breathing became shallow, rapid. The child released her grip on Mr. Fluffles, and her small body began to tremble. This wasn't normal 3-year-old behavior. This wasn't a tantrum or tiredness or overstimulation. This was pure, primal fear. Emma's head whipped around, her eyes searching, her small mouth opening as if to cry out. Maria's heart was hammering so violently she thought it might break through her ribs. "Emma, what's wrong, baby?" Maria whispered urgently, scanning her daughter's face for signs of physical distress. Was she sick? Did she need the bathroom? But Emma's fear wasn't directed inward. It was directed outward, focused on something or someone external. The little girl's body went completely rigid in her mother's arms. Then, with the kind of unwavering certainty that only young children can possess, the kind that hasn't yet learned to doubt itself, Emma raised her small arm and pointed directly across the terminal. She pointed at the man in the charcoal suit. Her tiny finger extended with absolute precision, trembling slightly with the intensity of whatever she was sensing. And then Emma whispered something that froze Maria's entire world. "Bad man, Mommy. Very bad man. He hurt people. He hurt lots and lots of people." The words came out in Emma's soft, lisping voice, but they carried a weight and certainty that seemed impossible for a 3-year-old to possess. Emma's dark eyes were locked on the stranger, wide with a fear that transcended normal childhood anxiety. She wasn't afraid of the dog or the crowds or any typical airport trigger. She was afraid of him, specifically, deliberately, with the kind of primal recognition that suggested she was sensing something real, something genuine, something deadly. Maria's blood ran cold. She looked from her daughter to the man, her protective instincts warring with confusion. The man was still watching the security line, his hand once again touching his briefcase. His jaw remained clenched. His eyes continued their methodical scan. To any casual observer, he appeared like any other traveler, perhaps a bit intense, perhaps a bit stressed, but not obviously dangerous. But Maria had just witnessed her daughter's inexplicable terror, heard words of warning that seemed impossible for a 3-year-old to articulate so clearly. Every maternal instinct screamed at Maria to create distance between Emma and this man, but she also felt frozen, uncertain, questioning her own instincts. What would she say to security? That her daughter had a bad feeling? Would they take her seriously, or would they dismiss her as an overprotective parent seeing threats where none existed? That's when Officer James Wright, standing nearby with his massive German Shepherd partner Max, suddenly tensed. Max's body went rigid. The dog's ears snapped forward with sudden, violent alertness. And as Wright watched his partner's reaction in stunned recognition, he realized with absolute certainty that Emma's warning, this impossible, inexplicable warning from a 3-year-old child, was about to prove tragically, devastatingly real. Officer James Wright had been working with Max for 6 years, and in that time, he'd learned to trust his partner with his life. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a highly trained detection specialist, a partner with an almost supernatural ability to identify threats that human senses couldn't perceive. The German Shepherd had prevented 3 confirmed terrorist attacks, discovered narcotics worth millions of dollars, and saved 17 lives that Wright knew of. But there were probably more saves that never made the news, incidents prevented so completely that nobody even realized danger had been lurking nearby. Max's record was legendary throughout Denver International Airport security. Handlers whispered about his almost mystical abilities. Supervisors had received commendations for Max's work, but Wright understood something most people didn't. Max wasn't magical. He was simply doing what hundreds of thousands of years of canine evolution had designed him to do, detecting threats through scent, through body language, through the invisible chemical signatures that humans had essentially become blind to. Today had started like any other Tuesday shift for Wright. He'd arrived at the airport at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before his official shift began. Max always needed that early time, a chance to stretch his muscles, to work through some of his boundless energy, to mentally prepare for the day ahead. They'd done their routine, a long walk through the airport's perimeter, allowing Max to mark familiar territory and establish his psychological presence. Max loved this part of the job, his tail wagging as he moved through the familiar hallways, acknowledging other officers with a slight head turn or a gentle nudge. Wright had grabbed coffee, black, strong, no sugar, from the officer's break room. He'd checked his email, reviewed any security alerts from the previous shift, and confirmed that no major incidents had occurred overnight. By 7:30, Wright and Max had taken their position at Checkpoint B. This was one of the busiest security points in Denver International, processing hundreds of travelers every hour. Wright had worked this checkpoint for 4 years, and he knew its rhythms intimately. Early morning was slightly calmer, building to a chaotic peak around 8:30 to 9. Tuesday mornings were typically moderate, not quite as insane as Friday afternoons, but definitely busier than Sunday mornings. Wright stood beside Max, who sat in perfect alert posture, his ears perked, his dark eyes scanning the checkpoint with professional focus. The dog wore his official vest, a practical piece of equipment that identified him as working security, and a collar fitted with tracking and communication devices. Wright loved this part of his job, the clarity of it, the certainty. He and Max had a specific purpose: identify threats. It was straightforward, uncomplicated by bureaucratic confusion or political considerations. Threats were threats. Max found them. Wright's job was to respond appropriately. The partnership was simple, pure, and effective. As they stood watching the checkpoint, Wright felt that familiar sense of calm focus that came from years of training. His eyes moved systematically through the checkpoint, checking faces, assessing body language, watching for the subtle signs of nervousness or deception that indicated potential problems, sweating when the temperature was cool, avoiding eye contact with security personnel, moving with unusual stiffness or tension, repeatedly checking bags or pockets. These were the tells that suggested criminal intent. The morning proceeded normally for the first hour. Travelers came and went, the security line flowing in its established rhythm. Most people were routine, predictable, benign. Families traveling to visit relatives, business travelers heading to meetings, college students returning to campus. The human parade moved through Checkpoint B with mechanical regularity. Wright monitored it all with the unconscious awareness that came from thousands of hours of this exact work. Max seemed relaxed, occasionally standing to shift his weight, but otherwise content to observe the checkpoint with professional indifference. Then something changed. Wright first noticed it in Max's ears. The dog's ears, which had been in a semi-alert state, suddenly snapped forward with violent intensity. Max's entire body went rigid, a complete transformation from relaxed observation to explosive readiness. The dog's head turned with laser focus toward a specific point in the checkpoint. Wright's heart immediately accelerated. He'd seen this before. He knew exactly what it meant. Max had detected something. Not just noticed something, but detected something that triggered his training response, something dangerous. Wright's eyes immediately followed Max's gaze to locate the threat. He saw her first, a woman with a small child standing in the checkpoint line. Nothing obviously wrong there. The woman was checking her watch, looking slightly anxious the way most travelers did. The child, a tiny girl in a pink dress, was clinging to her mother's neck, holding a worn teddy bear. Beautiful moment, actually, the kind of family scene that normally produced smiles. But Max wasn't looking at them. Max was looking past them. The dog's nose began working in rapid, controlled patterns, the distinctive sniffing technique that indicated active detection. Max's entire frame vibrated with intensity. His tail, which had been hanging naturally, suddenly curled upward with tension. The low growl that rumbled from deep in his chest was something Wright had learned to fear. Max didn't growl randomly. Max didn't make unnecessary sounds. When Max growled, it meant the dog had detected something genuinely threatening. The sound was subtle, barely audible over the ambient noise of the checkpoint, but Wright heard it as clearly as if Max had screamed. Wright's training took over instantly. His tactical mind shifted into operational mode. He began scanning systematically in the direction Max was indicating, searching for the threat his partner had already identified. There, standing alone in the security line, approximately 25 feet from their position, a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit. The man stood with the kind of rigid posture that suggested significant stress or purposeful control. His hand gripped a black leather briefcase with white-knuckled intensity. His jaw was clenched so tightly that Wright could see the muscle tension from across the terminal. But what alarmed Wright most wasn't the man's obvious stress signals. It was the man's eyes. Those pale blue eyes scanned the checkpoint with cold, methodical precision, cataloging exits, assessing security personnel, evaluating threats and advantages with the focused intensity of a predator. This wasn't the nervous energy of someone worried about missing a flight. This was the focused attention of someone conducting tactical assessment. Max lunged forward, his leash straining with sudden, explosive power. The dog pulled so hard that Wright barely maintained control. Max's eyes never left the target. His nose continued working, detecting something in the air that triggered every single alert protocol in his highly trained brain. Wright realized, with the kind of certainty that came from years of partnership with Max, that his dog was detecting explosives. Not drugs, not narcotics, explosives. The kind of threat that could kill hundreds of people. Wright's hand moved toward his radio, but before he could transmit, he witnessed something that made his blood turn to ice. The little girl in the pink dress, the one clinging to her mother, suddenly pointed directly at the man. Her tiny finger extended with absolute precision, trembling with whatever she was sensing. And in the brief moment before Wright raised his radio, he heard her whisper words that confirmed his worst fears. "Bad man, Mommy. Very bad man." Wright had seen many things in his career. He'd witnessed human depravity, criminal sophistication, and desperate violence. But he'd never seen a 3-year-old child recognize danger with such absolute certainty. And he'd never seen Max and a small child respond to the same threat in perfect synchronization. In that instant, everything changed. The peaceful morning at Denver International Airport was about to transform into controlled chaos. The threat that Max had detected and that Emma had somehow sensed was about to manifest. Officer Wright's hand moved toward his radio with deliberate urgency, knowing that seconds mattered, that lives hung in the balance, that the next few minutes would determine whether this day ended in tragedy or miracle. Officer James Wright's voice crackled through the radio with controlled urgency, though his heart was pounding so violently he thought it might burst from his chest. "All units, Checkpoint B, potential explosive device in the security line. Suspect is a tall male, approximately 6'2", wearing charcoal suit, carrying black leather briefcase. All personnel stand by for immediate response." His words were measured, professional, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding his system. Years of training had taught him to remain calm in crisis situations. Panic spread like wildfire through a crowd, and panic caused deaths. He needed to be the steady voice that others relied upon, the calm center around which the response would organize. Max was pulling so hard against his leash that Wright could barely hold the dog. The German Shepherd's muscles were corded with intensity, every fiber of his being focused on the suspect. The dog knew something was wrong. Max's training had primed him to detect threats, and his instincts were screaming that this man represented immediate danger. Wright could feel the dog's desperation to move forward, to close the distance, to confront the threat. Wright held firm, keeping Max at his side while simultaneously watching the suspect's reaction to the radio transmission. The man's face transformed in an instant. The cold, methodical expression vanished, replaced by raw panic and barely controlled rage. His pale blue eyes widened, and for just a fraction of a second, Wright saw something primal flicker behind those icy eyes, pure, undiluted desperation mixed with fanatical determination. The man's hand tightened on the briefcase. He looked down at it, then back at the security checkpoint, calculating, assessing, making a decision. In that moment, Wright knew with absolute certainty that the man was about to run. The suspect had been identified. The jig was up, and whatever was inside that briefcase represented a level of threat that prompted the man to abandon his original plan. The suspect bolted. He moved with explosive speed, shoving aside an elderly couple who were standing in line. The man's expensive dress shoes pounded against the polished airport floor as he sprinted toward the terminal's main corridor. The elderly woman fell backward, her husband catching her, both of them screaming in shock and fear. Luggage tumbled. A child cried. The peaceful morning checkpoint devolved into chaos within seconds. Travelers scattered like panicked birds, their instincts screaming that something catastrophically wrong was happening. All units, suspect is fleeing checkpoint B toward terminal corridor. Wright's voice remained steady as he released Max's leash. The dog didn't need further encouragement. Max exploded forward with pure predatory speed, his muscular frame moving with the power and grace that came from generations of working dog breeding. Wright ran behind his partner, his hand on his service weapon, his eyes locked on the suspect's retreating figure. Other security personnel materialized from seemingly nowhere, responding to the radio alert with practiced urgency. This was what they trained for. This was what all those drills and scenarios and contingency plans had prepared them for. The suspect was fast, surprisingly fast for a man carrying a heavy briefcase. He dodged around luggage carts and startled passengers with desperate agility, but Max was faster. The German Shepherd closed the distance with relentless determination, his powerful legs covering ground with each explosive stride. Wright could hear the clicking of Max's nails against the floor, hear the dog's controlled breathing, sense the pure focus radiating from his partner. This was Max at his finest, a highly trained instrument of protection, unleashed to do exactly what his DNA and training had prepared him to do. The suspect glanced backward, saw Max closing on him, and his face contorted with even greater panic. He suddenly veered left, crashing through a doorway marked staff only with his shoulder. The briefcase swung wildly and Wright's mind flashed to horrifying images, the briefcase opening, contents spilling, devices detonating in a crowded airport terminal. The logistics of such a catastrophe were almost incomprehensible. Hundreds of casualties, maimed children, families destroyed. But Wright couldn't think about that now. He could only focus on the immediate moment, on stopping the suspect before he could execute whatever plan had brought him to Denver International with explosives in his briefcase. 7 TSA agents had joined the pursuit now, their uniforms visible as they ran through the terminal. Airport security personnel had cordoned off sections of the checkpoint, directing panicked travelers toward emergency exits. Announcements crackled over the public address system, calm, professional instructions asking people to proceed to designated assembly areas. The airport's extensive security protocols, developed after years of threat assessments and vulnerability analyses, were activating in real time. This was the scenario that security personnel trained for, planned for, hoped would never actually occur. The suspect burst through another set of doors, this time crashing into the baggage claim area. Travelers and baggage handlers froze, their brains struggling to process what they were witnessing. A man in an expensive suit running desperately through their peaceful airport morning. Security personnel in pursuit. A massive German Shepherd closing the distance at terrifying speed. Reality seemed to shift into surreal nightmare for everyone witnessing the scene. The suspect's desperation was becoming increasingly visible. His breathing was labored, his movements more erratic. He was tiring, burning energy at an unsustainable rate. Max, conversely, seemed to be gathering speed, his conditioning and training allowing him to maintain his relentless pursuit without apparent fatigue. The dog was like a heat-seeking missile, focused, determined, inexorable. Wright could see the moment the suspect realized he couldn't outrun Max. Could see the man's thought process shifting from escape to confrontation. Could see the calculation occurring in those cold blue eyes as the man assessed whether he had time to open his briefcase, to trigger whatever devices were inside, to accomplish his goal even as he was being tackled. Max covered the final distance with explosive fury. The German Shepherd launched himself at the suspect with perfectly trained technique, not attacking the man's throat or face, but using his massive body weight to knock the suspect off balance. The collision occurred near a row of baggage claim carousels, and the impact was devastating. The man went down hard, his briefcase flying from his grip, skittering across the polished floor. Max landed on the suspect's chest, pinning him with approximately 85 pounds of muscle and training. Wright was there within seconds, his weapon drawn but not aimed. 7 TSA agents surrounded them, weapons ready, positioning themselves to contain the threat. The suspect lay pinned beneath Max, the dog's jaws positioned near the man's throat, not actually biting, but making clear the devastating consequences of any further resistance. The man's eyes were wild, fanatical, burned with the fever of someone committed to a cause beyond normal human rationality. And then came the words that made Wright's blood run even colder. "You're too late," the suspect hissed through gasping breaths. "You can't stop what's coming. There are others in other airports, others with their own briefcases. The plan continues with or without me." Wright realized with horrifying clarity that this suspect wasn't a lone operative. This was part of something larger, something coordinated, something that threatened multiple airports simultaneously across the entire United States. The suspect lay sprawled across the baggage claim floor, Max's muscular body pinning him with devastating effectiveness. The dog's jaws remained positioned inches from the man's throat, not touching, not breaking skin, but making the threat unmistakably clear. One wrong move, one attempt to reach for anything, and Max would respond with lethal precision. Wright kept his weapon trained on the suspect's center mass, his finger resting alongside the trigger guard rather than on the trigger itself. Protocol demanded caution. Protocol demanded that they secure the threat without unnecessary escalation. But Wright's mind was racing, calculating, processing the man's disturbing revelation about coordinated attacks across multiple airports. "Don't move," Wright commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone trained to control dangerous situations. "You're surrounded. Any movement triggers an immediate response. Understand?" The suspect's face was twisted with rage and fanaticism, his pale blue eyes burning with the kind of intensity that Wright recognized as ideological commitment. This man wasn't motivated by money or personal grievance. This was someone who believed, genuinely, passionately believed, that he was serving a higher purpose. Those were the most dangerous criminals, the ones who couldn't be negotiated with because they'd already decided that their cause justified any atrocity. Wright had encountered this type before, and he knew that reasoning with them was essentially pointless. 7 TSA agents and 2 additional Denver police officers formed a perimeter around the struggling suspect. Their weapons were drawn but not aimed directly at the man. They needed to avoid any accidental discharge that might trigger a catastrophic situation. The briefcase lay approximately 8 feet away, having skidded across the polished floor when the suspect had lost his grip. Nobody dared approach it. Everyone understood that black leather briefcase represented potential death, potential devastation, potential transformation of this moment into absolute tragedy. "We need the bomb squad," Wright said into his radio, keeping his eyes locked on the suspect. "And FBI, notify them we have a potential coordinated threat across multiple airports. Suspect is claiming there are additional operatives." "All units copy," came the steady response from dispatch. "Bomb squad en route, ETA 4 minutes. FBI has been notified and is mobilizing. Maintain secure perimeter." The suspect suddenly began struggling with renewed intensity, his body thrashing beneath Max's weight. The dog adjusted his position, maintaining control while avoiding causing unnecessary injury. Max was trained to restrain without mauling, to control without killing. Though if the suspect made a move toward the briefcase or attempted to trigger any device, Max would respond with whatever force proved necessary. "Get your dog off me," the suspect screamed, thrashing violently. "You don't understand what's happening. This is necessary. This is justice. The system is corrupt and corruption requires cleansing." Wright could hear the fanatical conviction in the man's voice, the absolute certainty that his planned attack was righteous and necessary. This was someone who had convinced himself that mass murder was a legitimate political statement. Wright had seen this mentality before in his years of security work, individuals so consumed by ideology that they'd lost connection with basic human compassion and morality. "Name," Wright demanded, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Give me your name." The suspect laughed, an actual laugh, high-pitched and slightly unhinged. "My name is irrelevant. I'm a soldier in a righteous cause. Whether I succeed or fail today doesn't matter. The movement is larger than any individual. We're everywhere. We're organized. We're committed." "Your name," Wright repeated, his voice colder now, "or I let my dog decide how rough this gets." The suspect's laughter died. He stared up at Max, at the German shepherd's unwavering focus, at the absolute certainty in the dog's eyes that indicated Max would do exactly what Wright suggested. For a moment, doubt flickered across the suspect's face. Doubt about his certainty, doubt about his righteousness, doubt about the absolute conviction that had sustained him through whatever planning and preparation had led to this moment. "Marcus Vrell," the suspect finally spat. "My name is Marcus Vrell and I'm a patriot. Everything I've done has been for America's future." Wright's mind immediately logged the name, filed it away for the FBI investigation that was certainly about to begin. Marcus Vrell. The name would soon appear in databases, on watch lists, in the files of security agencies across the country. The name would become synonymous with a foiled terrorist attack, with the intersection of a trained police dog and a 3-year-old child's inexplicable perception. The baggage claim area had been completely evacuated now. Security personnel had ushered away all travelers, all airport employees, everyone who wasn't essential to containing the threat. The area surrounding Vrell, Max, and Wright had become a secured zone, cleared, controlled, dangerous. The bomb squad was en route. The FBI was mobilizing. And somewhere in the airport, a young mother was holding her daughter, both of them traumatized by the violent eruption of danger they'd inadvertently helped prevent. Vrell suddenly began bucking with renewed intensity, his body twisting and turning in desperate attempts to dislodge Max. "You think you've stopped anything?" he screamed. "This is just one operation. There are 6 other airports. There are 7 other operatives. By the time you've secured this briefcase, 3 others will have already detonated. You've failed. The system has failed. The corruption runs too deep." Wright's blood ran ice cold. 6 other airports, 7 other operatives. If Vrell was telling the truth and based on the sophistication of the briefcase and the man's obvious commitment, Wright had to assume he was, then this moment represented only one small piece of a much larger, coordinated attack. The logistics of such an operation were staggering. The casualty potential was incomprehensible. Hundreds, potentially thousands of lives hung in the balance. "Dispatch, relay to FBI," Wright said urgently. "Suspect claims coordinated attacks across multiple airports. 7 operatives. Immediate national security alert required." "Copy that," Dispatch responded, and Wright could hear the shift in tone. The recognition that this had escalated from a single airport security incident to a genuine national emergency. Vrell continued struggling, continuing his half-crazed monologue about righteous violence and necessary cleansing. Max remained unmoved, literally and figuratively, holding his position with the absolute certainty that came from thousands of hours of training. The dog had done his job. Max had detected the threat. Max had apprehended the suspect. Now Max would maintain control until human law enforcement could take permanent custody. The bomb squad vehicles arrived with their characteristic urgency, moving into position at the baggage claim area. Heavily armored personnel in specialized protective equipment emerged, carrying equipment designed to detect, analyze, and potentially neutralize explosive devices. They approached the black briefcase with the cautious respect of professionals who understood that one mistake could mean catastrophic consequences. And as the bomb squad technicians began their assessment, as the FBI agents entered the baggage claim area with their own devices and recording equipment, as the full machinery of national security began mobilizing in response to Vrel's coordinated threat, Wright found himself thinking about that little girl in the pink dress, the child who had somehow sensed danger that invisible to human perception. That 3-year-old had pointed at Marcus Vrel and identified him as evil, and in that moment of innocent perception, she may have prevented one of the worst terrorist attacks in American history. The bomb squad's preliminary assessment of Marcus Vrel's briefcase took 47 minutes, 47 minutes that felt like hours to everyone involved in the investigation. The specialized technicians worked with methodical precision, using remote cameras and detection equipment to peer inside the black leather case without physically opening it. Wright stood at a safe distance, watching through a specialized monitor as the technicians documented each component of the device. What they discovered made even the most experienced agents visibly pale. Inside the briefcase were 3 sophisticated explosive devices, not amateur constructions, but professionally engineered weapons designed by someone with genuine expertise in explosives. The devices featured military-grade detonators, high-density explosives estimated at approximately 15 pounds of C4 plastic explosive per device, and sophisticated timer mechanisms that could be remotely triggered. The craftsmanship was undeniably professional. The destructive potential was catastrophic. If these devices had detonated in Denver International Airport's crowded checkpoint area, the casualty count would have easily exceeded 300 people. Men, women, and children, families traveling to visit relatives, business professionals heading to meetings, college students returning to campus, all vaporized in an instant of violence. FBI Special Agent Thomas Reeves arrived at Denver International within an hour of the initial alert. Reeves was a career counterterrorism specialist with 23 years of federal service and an impressive record of dismantling domestic extremist networks. He was a tall man, gray-haired, with the kind of measured demeanor that came from dealing with the worst elements of human behavior on a regular basis. His first action was to secure the briefcase for transport to a federal facility where it could be analyzed by explosive ordnance specialists. His second action was to personally interrogate Marcus Vrel. The interrogation took place in a secured facility within Denver International Airport Security Operations Center. Vrel was handcuffed to a steel table, his expensive suit torn and stained from his struggle with Max. The fanatical intensity had dimmed slightly from his pale blue eyes, replaced by a strange mixture of resignation and defiance. He seemed almost relieved, in a twisted way, that his cover had been blown, that he no longer needed to maintain pretense or secrecy. "Let's talk about the other 6 airports," Agent Reeves said calmly, sitting across from Vrel with a recording device running. "The other 7 operatives, the coordinated attacks you mentioned." Vrel smiled, an unsettling expression that revealed the depth of his ideological commitment. "I knew you'd ask. I expected interrogation. I'm prepared for whatever punishment awaits me, but you should understand that my sacrifice means nothing compared to what's coming. The movement is larger than you can possibly comprehend. We've been planning this for 5 years. 5 years of patient organization, careful recruitment, meticulous preparation." "Names," Reeves pressed. "Give me names, locations, timelines." Vrel's smile widened. "You're afraid. I can see it in your eyes. You're calculating casualty numbers. You're imagining the political fallout. You're understanding, finally, that the system is fragile, that all of this," he gestured broadly, indicating the airport around them, "can collapse in moments if the right pressure is applied." But Vrel, despite his ideological commitment, was a human being. And human beings, no matter how committed to causes, possess survival instincts. After 6 hours of interrogation, 6 hours during which Agent Reeves applied psychological pressure, offered potential leniency in exchange for cooperation, and painted vivid pictures of federal sentencing guidelines that would result in life imprisonment, Vrel began to break. What emerged over the following hours was a comprehensive map of a sophisticated domestic extremist network that had been operating largely undetected for nearly 5 years. The organization called itself the Cleansing, a militia group devoted to violent overthrow of what they perceived as a corrupt federal government. The network included 17 core members, dozens of peripheral supporters, and an operational infrastructure that extended across 8 states. Vrel's attack at Denver International was meant to be the first domino, a spectacular act of violence that would trigger a cascade of similar attacks at LaGuardia in New York, O'Hare in Chicago, Dallas-Fort Worth International, Los Angeles International, San Francisco International, and Seattle-Tacoma International. 7 coordinated attacks, each designed to maximize civilian casualties, each meant to create panic and chaos, each intended to demonstrate the federal government's inability to protect its citizens. The operational timeline had been set for February 14th, Valentine's Day, deliberately chosen because of the holiday's association with love and family. The attacks were meant to send a message. Nowhere was safe, nothing was sacred. The system had failed to protect even its most vulnerable citizens. Vrel provided agent after agent, location after location, detail after detail. He revealed that the organization had been funded through cryptocurrency purchases and donations from international extremist networks. He explained that members had been carefully vetted through underground online forums. He described the training camps in rural Montana where operatives learned explosives construction and tactical planning. He outlined the cell structure that meant individual operatives knew only their immediate team members, preventing any single person's capture from compromising the entire network. By the time Vrel finished his comprehensive confession, federal law enforcement had initiated coordinated raids across 8 states. 6 additional suspects were arrested at airports in New York, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle, each carrying briefcases containing explosives identical to the devices Vrel had brought to Denver. One suspect in Seattle attempted to detonate his device when federal agents moved to apprehend him, but the specialized equipment confiscated it before detonation was possible. Another suspect in Chicago tried to flee, resulting in a high-speed chase that ended with his vehicle crashing into a concrete barrier. But ultimately, through the combination of Vrel's comprehensive confession and federal coordination, all 7 coordinated attacks were prevented. The casualty count that could have occurred exceeded 1,000 people. The economic damage to the aviation industry would have been catastrophic. The psychological impact on the American public would have reverberated for decades. But because a 3-year-old girl had inexplicably recognized danger in a stranger's eyes, because a trained German shepherd had detected explosives that posed invisible threat, because a professional security officer had trusted his partner's alert, the attacks had been prevented. The network had been dismantled. The operatives had been arrested and charged with federal terrorism crimes carrying mandatory life sentences. As the investigation expanded and the full scope of the Cleansing's network became apparent, federal prosecutors began preparing for what would become one of the largest domestic terrorism prosecutions in American history. The case would eventually involve testimony from dozens of witnesses, analysis of thousands of pieces of evidence, and complicated legal arguments about the intersection of free speech and violent extremism. But the foundation of the entire case rested on that moment when Marcus Vrel had walked into Denver International Airport with explosives in his briefcase, when a German shepherd had detected invisible threat, and when a child had somehow recognized evil in human form. In the days following the arrest of Marcus Vrell and the coordinated raids across 8 states, news of the prevented attacks spread across American media with the intensity of wildfire. Cable news networks ran 24-hour coverage. Major newspapers devoted front-page headlines to the story. Social media exploded with discussion, analysis, and speculation about what could have been. The narrative was compelling. A sophisticated domestic terrorist network planning coordinated attacks across America's busiest airports, all prevented through the combination of a trained police dog and, most remarkably, a 3-year-old child's inexplicable perception. The story of Emma Santos and her ability to recognize danger became the human interest angle that captured public imagination. News crews descended on Denver, seeking interviews with Maria Santos and her daughter. Reporters camped outside their home, desperate for exclusive statements, photographs, video footage. Maria initially refused all requests for interviews, wanting to protect her daughter's privacy and shield her from the intense media spotlight. But as the story continued to dominate national discourse, as questions grew about how Emma had sensed what highly trained security personnel could not perceive, Maria reluctantly agreed to limited media engagement. Emma, unaware of the magnitude of what had occurred, simply wanted her life to return to normal. The 3-year-old had nightmares following the incident, vivid, disturbing dreams where the bad man chased her through airport corridors. She became anxious in crowded places, clinging to her mother with desperate intensity. She developed a stutter that hadn't existed before, her small voice sometimes struggling to form words. These were the invisible psychological costs of having intersected with genuine evil, of having sensed threat that most adults couldn't perceive, of having somehow triggered events that extended far beyond her comprehension. Clinical psychologists and developmental neuroscientists became intensely interested in Emma's case. How had a 3-year-old child recognized danger that invisible to adults? What neurological or psychological mechanisms allowed such extraordinary perception? Was this a unique ability limited to Emma, or did it suggest capacities that existed in all children but were somehow trained out or suppressed through normal developmental processes? Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a renowned developmental psychologist from the University of Colorado, reached out to Maria Santos requesting permission to conduct comprehensive psychological and neurological evaluations of Emma. Hendricks explained that understanding Emma's unique abilities might unlock insights into human perception, threat detection, and the role that intuition played in survival. After careful consideration, Maria agreed to participate in the research, hoping that scientific understanding might help other children develop similar protective instincts. The evaluations took place over several weeks. Emma underwent brain imaging, psychological testing, personality assessment, and sensory perception evaluations. The results were remarkable and somewhat bewildering to the research team. Emma's brain showed heightened activity in regions associated with threat detection, emotional processing, and pattern recognition. Her sensory acuity, particularly her ability to detect subtle changes in human behavior and emotional states, was measurably above average for her age. Her performance on tests designed to assess emotional intelligence and social perception far exceeded what would be expected for a 3-year-old. But the most significant finding was something Dr. Hendricks called empathic resonance, Emma's ability to sense emotional states in other people with extraordinary accuracy. When shown photographs of individuals, Emma could identify emotional content and intention with accuracy that suggested she was perceiving something beyond simple facial expressions. When placed in rooms with individuals displaying different emotional states, Emma's physiological responses, heart rate, skin conductance, pupil dilation, indicated she was literally sensing the emotional temperature of those around her. Dr. Hendricks published preliminary findings in the Journal of Developmental Psychology, proposing that young children possessed heightened threat detection capabilities that were gradually suppressed or trained out through normal development. The theory suggested that human infants and toddlers retained evolutionary survival mechanisms that allowed them to perceive danger with remarkable accuracy, mechanisms that modern civilization had rendered unnecessary, and therefore parents and educational systems gradually conditioned out of children as they developed. Emma's case suggested that some children maintained these capabilities longer than others, or possessed them in more pronounced forms. The implications were staggering. If scientists could understand how Emma's threat detection abilities functioned, they might be able to develop training protocols that helped other individuals, security personnel, emergency responders, teachers, recognize danger more effectively. The research generated significant controversy within the scientific community. Some colleagues praised Dr. Hendricks for exploring a fascinating and previously understudied aspect of human development. Others criticized her for what they perceived as pseudoscientific reasoning, arguing that Emma's ability to identify Marcus Vrel was coincidence rather than evidence of exceptional perception. The debate raged across academic conferences and peer-reviewed journals, with passionate arguments on both sides. But beyond the academic discourse, Emma's story resonated with the American public on a deeper, more emotional level. She became a symbol of the unexpected sources of heroism, of the possibility that extraordinary capabilities existed in ordinary people, even in a 3-year-old child. Schools across the country began teaching Emma's story to children, emphasizing the importance of listening to instincts, trusting intuition, and speaking up when something felt wrong. Mental health professionals referenced Emma's case when discussing the importance of validating children's emotional perceptions, rather than dismissing them as irrational fears. Emma received numerous awards and commendations. The Denver Airport Commission presented her with a special medal of service. The governor of Colorado declared March 14th the anniversary of the prevented attacks, Emma Santos Day, throughout the state. Various organizations reached out offering scholarships, college funding, and educational opportunities. Maria had to carefully navigate these offers, wanting to honor her daughter's contribution while protecting her from exploitation or overexposure. Officer James Wright and Max also became public figures. They were invited to appear on major television programs, to give presentations at security conferences, to participate in documentaries about the prevented attacks. Wright handled the attention with characteristic professionalism, consistently redirecting credit toward his partner Max and toward Emma's inexplicable perception. He appeared in carefully selected media appearances, where he could explain the mechanics of K9 detection, while acknowledging the mystery of Emma's ability. Max, now a celebrity among law enforcement circles, was featured in training videos and security briefings. The German Shepherd's photograph appeared in news articles, magazine features, and eventually in a children's book titled Max the Brave: How Police Dogs Saved a Nation. The book portrayed Max's work in age-appropriate language, emphasizing the importance of training, dedication, and partnership. School children across America read about Max, and visits to the Denver airport became pilgrimages where families hoped to glimpse the famous German Shepherd. The intersection of a trained police dog, a 3-year-old girl's mysterious perception, and a dedicated security officer had created a moment that transcended typical news cycles. It had become part of American popular consciousness, a story about unexpected heroism, about the complexity of human perception, about the possibility that children possessed wisdom and instincts that adults had learned to ignore. Emma Santos, without understanding the magnitude of her contribution, had become a symbol of hope and protection in an increasingly anxious nation. 3 months after the prevented attacks, Denver International Airport organized an official ceremony to recognize the individuals and institutions that had contributed to preventing the coordinated terrorist operations. The event was held in the airport's main terminal, in a specially designated area that could accommodate hundreds of dignitaries, media personnel, security officials, and invited guests. The ceremony was live-streamed to millions of viewers across the nation, representing a moment of collective recognition for the extraordinary intersection of training, instinct, and serendipity that had saved countless lives. Maria Santos arrived at the ceremony with Emma, who wore a special dress that her grandmother had sewn specifically for the occasion. A white dress with delicate embroidery, modest and elegant, designed to protect Emma's privacy while honoring the significance of the event. Maria had agonized over the decision to bring Emma, worried about the overwhelming attention and potential psychological impact on her already traumatized daughter. But she'd ultimately decided that Emma deserved to witness the recognition of her contribution, to understand in some age-appropriate way that her instinctive action had mattered. Officer James Wright arrived with Max, the German Shepherd wearing a specially designed ceremonial collar adorned with medals recognizing his service. Wright had polished his uniform to pristine perfection, every button gleaming, every crease sharp. But his focus was entirely on Max, on ensuring his partner remained calm and comfortable throughout the public attention. The dog had always handled crowds with professional equanimity, but Wright understood that this ceremony represented something different, a public acknowledgement of partnership that extended beyond typical law enforcement recognition. Denver's mayor, along with representatives from the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, TSA, and the governor's office, took the podium to deliver speeches emphasizing the importance of vigilance, training, and community cooperation in preventing terrorism. The speakers praised law enforcement personnel, security professionals, and the complex infrastructure that protected Americans traveling through airports. But the emotional heart of the ceremony came when Commissioner David Hartley stepped to the microphone to present special commendations. "Today," Hartley began, his voice carrying weight and gravitas, "we recognize extraordinary individuals who prevented a tragedy that could have claimed over 1,000 lives. We recognize Officer James Wright, whose dedication to his work and partnership with Max exemplified the highest standards of professional security. We recognize Max, a German Shepherd whose training and instincts detected danger invisible to human perception. And we recognize someone whose contribution transcends our usual categories of heroism." Commissioner Hartley turned directly toward Maria and Emma, gesturing for them to come forward. Maria took Emma's small hand and led her to the podium, where the 3-year-old looked impossibly small against the massive stage. Emma clung to her mother's leg, overwhelmed by the attention of hundreds of eyes, by the cameras flashing, by the sheer scale of public recognition. "We recognize Emma Santos," Hartley continued, "a 3-year-old child who possessed the courage and mysterious wisdom to recognize danger that had eluded the perception of trained adults. Emma, your instinctive action, your simple pointing and your honest words triggered a chain of events that prevented catastrophe. You are quite literally a hero." Emma didn't understand the words, didn't comprehend the magnitude of what was being acknowledged. But she understood that something important was happening, that people were paying attention to her, that her action had mattered in ways that extended beyond her comprehension. She buried her face in her mother's leg, overwhelmed, but also somehow sensing the significance of the moment. Officer Wright brought Max forward, and something extraordinary happened. Max, approaching Emma with the gentleness that characterized his interactions with children, lowered his massive head and gently licked the little girl's face. The German Shepherd seemed to understand, in that mysterious way that animals sometimes possessed, that this small human had somehow recognized danger alongside him. In that moment, the connection between Max and Emma transcended species, a partnership between a trained professional and an intuitive child, both having sensed the same threat from different perspectives. The photograph of that moment, Max's gentle interaction with Emma, the 3-year-old girl's small hand reaching up to touch the German Shepherd's face, became iconic. News organizations replayed it thousands of times. It was featured on magazine covers, framed in security offices across the nation, and eventually included in textbooks about human-animal interaction and threat detection. The image captured something ineffable about the relationship between humans and animals, about the possibility of communication and understanding that transcended normal categories. Federal prosecutors formally charged all 7 operatives arrested in the coordinated raids. The trials would take years, involving hundreds of hours of testimony, thousands of pieces of evidence, and complicated legal arguments. But the foundational narrative remained consistent. A 3-year-old child's perception had triggered the detection that prevented coordinated terrorist attacks. Emma's name would appear in legal documents, in trial transcripts, in appellate briefs. Future law students would study this case, analyzing how an ordinary moment at an airport had unraveled a sophisticated terrorist network. Dr. Patricia Hendricks continued her research into Emma's exceptional perceptual abilities, eventually publishing a comprehensive monograph titled Threat Detection in Early Childhood: The Case of Emma Santos and the Evolution of Human Intuition. The research generated significant attention within scientific communities, spawning new fields of inquiry into childhood perception and the role of intuition in threat detection. Universities began developing training programs based on Hendricks' findings, programs designed to help security personnel access and develop the threat detection capabilities that Emma had demonstrated instinctively. Maria documented Emma's development over the years, keeping detailed journals of her daughter's emotional recovery and psychological growth. The nightmares gradually diminished. The anxiety in crowded places slowly decreased. Emma began to process her experience with the support of specialized child psychologists who helped her understand, in age-appropriate ways, that she had sensed danger and had helped prevent harm. Rather than trauma completely defining Emma's childhood, the experience became integrated into her developing identity as a person who possessed unusual sensitivity and awareness. Officer Wright continued his work at Denver International Airport, eventually becoming the department's training director. He developed training protocols based on Max's detection methods, teaching other handlers how to recognize and respond to the subtle behavioral changes that indicated Max had detected explosives. He also began incorporating principles from Dr. Hendricks' research into security training, emphasizing the importance of listening to intuition, recognizing threat indicators, and trusting partnership, whether that partnership was between a handler and dog, or between security personnel and the communities they served. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence honoring the potential victims whose lives had been spared. The silence carried weight. Thousands of people, from security personnel to politicians to ordinary citizens watching on screens across the nation, pausing to acknowledge the tragedy that had been prevented, the families that had been protected, the futures that remained possible because of an extraordinary convergence of training, instinct, and a small child's mysterious perception. As the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Emma asked her mother a simple question: "Is the bad man gone now?" Maria knelt down to her daughter's level, looking into those dark eyes that possessed such unusual perception, and answered honestly, "Yes, baby, the bad man is gone, and you helped make sure he couldn't hurt people. You were very brave." 15 years passed. Emma Santos stood in the hallway outside her college dormitory room at the University of Colorado, holding acceptance letters from 3 prestigious graduate programs specializing in criminal psychology and behavioral threat assessment. At 18 years old, she had grown into a remarkable young woman, intelligent, compassionate, but also carrying the subtle weight of someone who understood the darkness that existed within human nature. Her childhood experience at Denver International Airport had shaped her trajectory in ways both obvious and profound. Emma's teenage years had been complicated by her unusual notoriety. She'd grown up with the knowledge that her 3-year-old self had prevented a tragedy, that her instinctive action had saved lives. Some classmates had been fascinated by her story, treating her as a minor celebrity. Others had been resentful, dismissing her as someone who'd been given undeserved attention. Emma had learned to navigate this complicated social landscape with maturity beyond her years, understanding that being known for a single moment in childhood didn't define her entire identity. Her parents had made deliberate choices to protect her privacy while honoring her contribution. They'd limited her media appearances, insisted that she maintain a normal childhood despite her unusual circumstances, and encouraged her to develop her own identity independent of the airport incident. Emma had attended regular schools, participated in standard extracurricular activities, experienced typical adolescent challenges and triumphs. But beneath the normal surface, something essential had been shaped by her early perception of danger, a commitment to understanding threat, to protecting others, to channeling her unusual sensitivity toward meaningful work. Dr. Patricia Hendricks had maintained contact with Emma throughout her childhood and adolescence, becoming something of a mentor figure as Emma expressed interest in the scientific research into perception and threat detection. Hendricks had encouraged Emma's academic development, written recommendation letters for college applications, and helped Emma understand the neurological and psychological foundations of the abilities she demonstrated so remarkably at such a young age. The relationship between the renowned psychologist and her most famous research subject had evolved into genuine intellectual partnership. Emma had chosen to attend the University of Colorado specifically because of Dr. Hendricks' position there. During her undergraduate years, Emma had taken advanced courses in psychology, neuroscience, and criminology. She'd worked in Hendricks' laboratory, contributing to ongoing research into threat perception and developing innovative protocols for training security personnel. Her undergraduate thesis, Integrating Intuitive and Analytical Threat Detection, Bridging the Gap Between Training and Instinct, had been published in the Journal of Applied Security Research, an extraordinary achievement for an undergraduate student. Now, with graduate school acceptance letters in hand, Emma faced a significant life decision. The 3 programs offering her admission were exceptional. One at Georgetown University focused on federal threat assessment, another at Stanford emphasizing neuroscientific approaches to criminal behavior, and a third at MIT working on artificial intelligence applications in security analysis. Each program represented a different potential trajectory for her life's work. But before Emma could fully process these opportunities, she received a call from Officer James Wright. Max had passed away. The German Shepherd had lived to 14 years old, an impressive lifespan for a large breed dog. Max had retired from active service at Denver International Airport 5 years earlier, spending his final years living peacefully with Officer Wright and his family. The dog had become a beloved member of the Wright household, receiving visitors from law enforcement agencies across the nation who wanted to pay respects to the legendary K9, who had prevented the coordinated terrorist attacks that had dominated American consciousness nearly 2 decades earlier. Emma attended Max's memorial service, held at Denver International Airport, where the dog had spent most of his working life. Hundreds of people came, security personnel from across the nation, handlers who had worked with Max, colleagues who had served alongside Officer Wright, and members of the general public who felt a personal connection to the German Shepherd who had become part of American folklore. News organizations covered the memorial extensively, treating Max's death as a moment of genuine national significance. Emma stood beside Officer Wright during the service, the two of them connected by their shared history. Wright had aged visibly in the years since the airport incident, his hair completely gray now, his face lined with the weight of years of security work. But his eyes remained clear, still holding the professional focus that had made him an exceptional officer. He placed his hand on Emma's shoulder as they watched Max's ashes being scattered in a specially designated area of the airport. "He knew you from that day," Wright said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I always believed Max understood that you'd seen the danger alongside him, that you were partners in that moment, even though you were just a little girl." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I've thought about that moment so many times," she said. "How I sensed something wrong about that man, how Max detected the explosives, how our two completely different forms of perception somehow aligned to prevent disaster." "That's what you need to study," Wright said, turning to face Emma directly. "That intersection between human intuition and canine detection, between trained response and instinctive awareness. That's where the future of security lies, not in choosing between analytical and intuitive approaches, but in integrating them." The conversation with Officer Wright crystallized Emma's decision. She chose the Stanford program, committing to research that would explore the neurological foundations of threat perception and develop training protocols that integrated intuitive and analytical approaches to security. Her doctoral research would eventually become groundbreaking work in the field, published in top-tier journals and adopted by security agencies across the nation. 25 years after that fateful morning at Denver International Airport, Dr. Emma Santos became a recognized expert in behavioral threat assessment and criminal psychology. She published numerous peer-reviewed articles, wrote 2 acclaimed books on threat detection and prevention, and consulted with federal agencies on security protocols and personnel training. Her work had saved lives, not through dramatic airport interceptions, but through systematic improvements in how security personnel recognized and responded to threats. Emma established the Wright-Santos Institute for Intuitive Security Studies at the University of Colorado, named to honor both Officer James Wright and the memory of Max. The institute became a premier research center, attracting scholars, security professionals, and law enforcement personnel from across the world. The institute's mission was to understand and develop the intersection between human intuition and systematic analysis, between trained response and instinctive perception. Emma never forgot that moment at Denver International Airport. She returned there regularly, sometimes standing in Checkpoint B, watching security personnel work with the new generation of detection dogs. She'd established a scholarship program in Max's name for promising students interested in animal behavior and security studies. And she'd written a comprehensive memoir titled The Child Who Saw Evil, documenting her life before the incident, her experience recognizing Marcus Vrell, her psychological journey through trauma and recovery, and her ultimate transformation into a security researcher dedicated to preventing the very threats that had touched her childhood so profoundly. Officer James Wright eventually retired from active security work, but remained involved with the Wright-Santos Institute, serving on its advisory board and mentoring the next generation of K-9 handlers and security professionals. He lived to see Emma's career flourish, lived to witness his partnership with Max honored in academic research and security protocols adopted by agencies across the nation. When Wright passed away at age 78, Emma delivered the eulogy at his funeral, crediting him with modeling the kind of partnership, dedication, and ethical commitment that had shaped her own professional trajectory. The story of a 3-year-old girl, a trained German Shepherd, and a dedicated security officer had become more than a moment of prevented tragedy. It had become a catalyst for transformation, for scientific advancement, for institutional change, for the recognition that extraordinary capability existed in unexpected places. Emma's childhood intuition, Max's professional training, and Officer Wright's dedication had converged to prevent immediate disaster, but their legacy extended far beyond that single moment. They had changed the conversation about security, about threat perception, about the possibility that wisdom existed in forms that science was only beginning to understand. And somewhere in an office at the Wright Santos Institute, framed photographs hung on the wall. One of a 3-year-old girl in a pink dress pointing across an airport terminal, another of a German shepherd with kind eyes and a handler's hand on his neck, and a third showing all three, Emma, Max, and Officer Wright, together at the memorial ceremony 15 years later, their shared moment having rippled across decades and transformed the landscape of human security forever.